Well, hi Laurie, how are you going today?
Hey, good day, Lucas. Doing well. Sun's back out again.
Any highlights from the week in 30 seconds?
Oh, it's choosing between them. Every hour is a highlight, actually. Um, oh yeah, I think I had a struggle to force myself into stopping to be formal in my prayers, just to catch up with myself trying to be eloquent or something or other like that when I was approaching God in worship. And I think He's told me it's okay now and then, but don't do it all the time.
That's good. Yeah. All right. Well, we've been looking at John chapter 1 and thinking through what that means for us, and looking at Jesus as the Word who was with God, pros, who was towards God, and who was God. And we sort of touched on a fair bit of that passage. I wanted to start the Savo just by looking at from chapter 9 in verse 1, or even might read from chapter 6 and then go up to verse 6 and then up to verse 14. There appeared a man named John, sent from God. He came as a witness to testify to the light, that all might become believers through him. He was not himself the light. He came to bear witness to the light. The real light, which enlightens every man, was even then coming into the world. He was in the world, but the world, though it owed its being to him, did not recognize him. He entered his own realm, and his own would not receive him. But to all who did receive him, to those who have yielded him their allegiance, he gave the right to become children of God, not born of any human stock or by the fleshly desire of a human father, but the offspring of God himself. So the Word became flesh. He came to dwell among us, and we saw his glory, such glory as befits the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So there's a truckload in there that we could look at, and we probably spent a bit of time last time thinking about sort of the light and the darkness, and the light coming into the darkness. What's your initial reaction thinking about that section?
We were talking about last time how the first verse is sort of going apart from time, seeing how the Logos is related to God and the mystery of God's being more than the unity is still there, but that within it there is this these two persons here. But after John's kind of said about as much as is possible to be said, and he only uses 3 clauses, he then begins to say how the Logos has related to time and space, how he's related to our world. He looked at it from the viewpoint of outside of, I guess, God's viewpoint, outside of time. And now he's looking at it from our point of view, within time. And the first thing, of course, is that it was through the Logos that God created the world, not only created it in the beginning, but maintains it, keeps it in existence. Like it very clearly says in Colossians, Paul says it, and also in Hebrews, that he sustains all things by his word of power. And that I've been thinking about that a lot this week, that he sustains all things by his word of power. The word, of course, is the Logos. It just seems to me that there is something like God in the creation itself, that he comes, it's the Logos who created everything and who sustains everything, and that in some mysterious way we exist in God, like Paul says in that message in chapter 17, in him we live and move and have our being. And that means that ordinary life, this has gripped me, I guess, through this last week more. well, it's there all the time, I suppose, but that there's nothing ordinary about anything in life. Everything has got the life of God in it, and it's God got his attention upon the fly that I just sprayed and killed. Every single bit of creation is kept in existence by God's concentrating on it, his mind, his purpose, his power. And that's a pretty amazing thing, that there's something beyond time just in our existence. And it really makes you think seriously about how we should relate. Well, I guess we're waking up to it in being concerned about the environment, and especially we should be concerned about one another.
Yeah. So how do you, like, when you think about that, how do you reconcile that with what we know of science and the way the science explains the world?
Well, the science only explains the mechanism of it, but doesn't have any like it connects things together in cause and effect, and you go back. But there's a limit to science. Just there's a limit. You can only go back to, what was it, 14.8 billion years ago when the Big Bang happened, and by definition, science can't go beyond that. And I think that illustrates for us that there's a lot more outside of science than what scientists often want to acknowledge. And of course, that involves morality, the difference between good and bad, and most of all, it concerns purpose. Like a long time ago, Bertrand Russell said that, everything's just molecules and atoms, and that ultimately there's no meaning and no purpose, that it doesn't matter whether we did come into existence, and it's not going to matter when we stop being in existence, that the universe will just roll on and on and on forever. Of course, that was before the Big Bang was known, and the thought that way back to Aristotle and the Greek philosophers, that the universe was going to last forever. That was the confidence. But
and they sort of have the concept that the universe was just going around in big circles.
Yeah.
But that sort of Jewish way of thinking, or the Hebrew way of thinking, was that history is working towards a purpose and an end, which is, it's part of Revelation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. Who was it? Thomas Carl. The Gifts of the Jews.
Yeah, that's where I got the idea from, actually. Yeah.
14 years ago. Yeah, that was a new thing in the world, that existence is really here for a purpose. And if you say it like that, you know that there's got to be a God behind it, that the person who made it with a plan. I think we Christians need to wake up more and more to the fact that God has a plan, and we don't jump up on soapboxes. They probably don't have soapboxes any longer, but used to be a lot of people who would proclaim the end of the world as coming soon and that sort of thing. And so much probably that we were embarrassed by it. We're too embarrassed now to even think about it, but it's a solid reality that there is a God who created us, who doesn't like the way things are, who has shown before the whole story of Noah and the flood, and then the destruction of Israel over and over again because of sin and unbelief, wickedness, evil. And so the threat's there quite clearly. God's not going to put up with it. And he's even revealed through Jesus Christ that the end of this present age is going to happen when Jesus Christ comes back. And John mentions that over and over again. It'd be worthwhile following that thought through, actually. But
yeah. And I think the gift of all of that is that it avoids a fatalism.
Yeah.
It was probably in that sort of thinking before that Hebrew idea, a fatalism that you couldn't really change. Things were just going around in a circle, and that's just how it was and who you were. But if you know that God's got a plan and purpose for you, then you want to get on board with it. And the beautiful thing is actually invited us into being that change and to
exactly.
bring about that change in the world.
That's right. Remember one of the things Jesus said was that this gospel will be preached in all the world, and then the end will come. And I think we've like you were saying, we were working to bring about the end of the world. The Christians have been, while they've been sharing the message of Christ around the world, and it's probably, I imagine, what with our ability to communicate now, there's the message has really fulfilled Jesus' promise that it would be known in the whole world. Take away another reason for thinking that the Lord won't come back soon.
Yeah. So back to the passage, there's a bit of a jump there, like which in my mind seems a weird one. And so he goes from talking about this sort of lofty ideas of the Word being with God, the Word being God, and the light and the darkness. And then he says, there appeared a man named John, sent from God. He came as a witness to testify to the light. So he sort of jumps from these philosophical ideas to this historical event of John appearing in the desert.
But it's only just a couple of verses, and he still continues with his kind of broader philosophical approach, or if that's theological perhaps.
Yeah.
That really says, hey, John the Baptist is really important, that there's something really significant. John wouldn't have put it here in this kind of setting, this comment about John. And I think what he's trying to say is, in the previous verse there, the light shines on in the dark and the darkness has never quenched it. And John represents how the light has been shining on in the darkness. And by referring to John the Baptist, he's saying this is exactly why God chose Israel, to put one nation in the world that is going to shine with this light. And like we talked about previously, the light, it's the life of the Word, the Logos, that has been put into creation, that is the light that shines to us human beings. And I think John represents the light that shone out of Israel, out of all of Israel's 2,000 years of existence up to that time, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all the prophets, that this was all brought to a climax in John the Baptist. And that's what he says. He came, actually, John didn't just come, and he wasn't just sent by God, but if you look at it carefully, what it says there is that there appeared a man named John who came from God. It's almost like he wasn't just sent by God, but that he had been in God's presence, and he was part of, sort of like the Father sent the Son into the world. John is up there, not nearly as high, of course, but up in that direction, that he was sent from God as part of the plan being fulfilled, part of the light shining into the world, into the universe. Yeah. And particularly the bit that it says the purpose of John coming is that all might become believers through him. And there's the ministry of John the Baptist probably reflected what God had been doing even before Israel, in trying to have people wake up to the reality that there is a creator God with a plan. And the message that John had, John the Baptist had, actually John doesn't mention that John the Baptist's message was about repentance. It just says, see the light, witness to the light. that all might become believers through him. Believers, as John the Evangelist points out, he was not himself the light, he came to bear witness to the light. So he's making it very clear that John the Baptist's role was to witness to the light so that people might believe in the light and so come back into the relationship with God, that God wants us all to have. He wants us to know him.
And there, right in that bit, and again, a couple of verses later, that idea of believing is a really central idea that John wants to get across. Absolutely. To this, that all might become believers. And then later in where it says, but all who did receive him or believe in him, to those who have yielded him their allegiance, he gave the right to become children of God. What part do you see that believing has in John and his message?
It's the key. When John, at the end in chapter 20, verse 30-31, said how that there were many other things that he had not recorded in the book, but these are recorded that you might believe. And then he says, this is what he wants you to believe. He wants you to believe that this Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the fulfillment of the promises made to the people of Israel, the promises that John the Baptist represents that we read. And that's why it's right there so important, right at the very beginning. And so we're to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and also that believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, that he's also this Logos who became flesh and dwelt amongst us, the presence of God here on the planet. And it needs to be said as well that this, again, is part of God's plan. He wants us to believe who Jesus is, both as Messiah and as Son of God, so that we might have life in his name. And once again, the life is Jesus' life shone. Jesus' life put there from the very beginning to shine to us, to help us to understand God's plan and to return into it and concentrate on being part of that plan.
But part of the battle there in the couple of previous verses is that he was in the world, but the world didn't recognize him. So this light has come, but people, they missed it. He entered his own realm, his own would not receive him.
Yeah, and it's a proper explanation flowing on from verse 9. John the Baptist was not the light. He came to witness to the light. And then John says, the real light which enlightens every man was even then coming into the world. Even in the time of John, even in the time of the prophets beforehand of the Old Testament. And I think even before that, ever since the beginning, the real light has been trying to enlighten every man, and it surrounded the whole human race as part of God's creation from the very beginning. And not just part of God's creation, but God's presence working, the theologians call it the imminent present. So did the pagans, actually, that this Logos, this reason, was just there, keeping everything in existence and making it work properly. And and then it goes on, he was in the world. So he was in the world in Israel. He was in the world in John the Baptist. He was in the world before Israel. And it says, but the world, though it owed its being to him, did not recognize him. And that's where initially in verse 5, it talks about the light shines on in the dark and the darkness has never quenched it. So there's this dream of God, and then there's the anti-dream, the dream of light and love and the light delight. And then there's the anti-dream of darkness and despair and missing out on real purpose and real meaning. And this is what he's talking about there. The world did not recognize him. So sad.
And then the way that my Bible puts it is that to those who did receive him, so it talks about receiving, and then also those who have yielded him their allegiance.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What does it mean to yield allegiance? Like, what's John trying to get at there? So the believing in who Jesus is and a yielding of allegiance, I guess submission would be part of it.
I think there's a bigger framework for it, Lucas. If he entered his own realm and his own would not receive him, I think that obviously has to be a reference to Israel. God's own realm is the people that he chose out specially to be his representatives on the earth. And the prophets were meaning they were meant to prepare Israel for an acceptance of the light so that they could live in the light, and Israel could be, as a nation, what John the Baptist was as a person, the light to the whole other nations of the world. And that's so sad. He entered his own realm, and his own would not receive him. The Jews wouldn't receive him then, and they haven't received him yet. According to prophecy, they will soon, but not yet. And it's on the basis of that then John goes on in his gospel and he says, but to all who did receive him, to those who've yielded him their allegiance, he gave the right, or better still, the authority to become children of God. And there's a transition taking place there. Israel was the nation who were known to be God's people. And it was kind of a matter of, you were born into a Jewish family as part of the Jewish nation, and so you were then an Israelite, a person representing God, and now bound with all these rules that they had to keep. But they failed. I feel so guilty when I talk about them failing, because we have failed just as badly. Getting tangled up in just the ordinary things of life. They don't have to be evil, but worse still, of course, is that there's a bit of us that not only just gets tangled up because we can't help it, life going on around us, but deliberately looking to get tangled up with what's evil and what's different, what's perverted, what isn't part of God's plan. That seems to be the twist, the bend in our nature. And
there's an interesting thing. Oh, yeah, sorry, you finish.
I was just going to say, all who did receive him, so it's all not as members of, and he points that out, not of any human stock or any human desire or any human decision, really. It's back to the individual. It's no longer, God's no longer dealing with Israel as his representative to be kind of the witness to the nations, but he's calling out of Israel and out of every nation those who will give him their allegiance, those who will, I guess, become aware and then wake up to the reality, and then kind of make the connection and be creatures like we, in our heart of hearts and in our best moments, know that we should be, in submitting to the Maker.
Yeah, I get the feeling, looking at John chapter 8 last week, doing a bit of study of that, you get the picture in there that people of Jesus' time weren't asking the question, are we the sons of God or not? Because they, that was part of their identity, was that they were the children of Abraham.
Yeah.
Here, Jesus, and then John is highlighting it at the start of his gospel, so obviously it's important. He's highlighting this idea that if you give your allegiance to this light and yield yourself to him, then you can become children of God. and that it's not born of a human, but by being the offspring of God himself. So it's this kind of new idea. And then obviously John built on that in the interaction of Jesus with Nicodemus, and talking this whole idea of being born again and believing in the Son, that he's the Son of God.
There's something beautiful there too. There's God's bit and our bit. I think that's clear as anything, you know. To all who did receive him, who've given him their allegiance, that's only the beginning point. He gives the right to become the authority to become children of God. And what's happened is something from God that has brought about what Jesus explained to Nicodemus, the new birth that makes us children of God. But it's all at the beginning. And it's our responsibility now to build on that. It's like as though the seed's planted, and from God's point of view, we're already part of the family, but the seed has to grow, and it's up to us to provide what the seed needs in order for it to grow, which of course is just simply making our effort to take it seriously and act appropriately, just to take notice of God, to you know how Peter says, hunger and thirst after the word of God. If this is true, then you want to know it all. You want to know what's going on. And you want to not only know what's going on, but you want to cooperate it with it as best as you can, so that the growing of the seed into its reality, us becoming what God's already made us to be, that takes priority in our life, you know, as the most important thing about us. This is why we exist. This is why God put us on the planet, you know.
Well, there's some echoes there of Genesis chapter 1, isn't there?
There is.
Commission to, you know, being made in the image of God, and then being given that commission to rule the earth and to subdue it. That's there's kind of that sense in there that having the authority as the actual children of God, you've got to learn to exercise that authority in this world, and to cooperate as children. And obviously the rights that a child has, the access that a child has to the father, and to the father's resources and authority as well.
Yeah. But I think it's important to grasp that God doesn't hold our hand all the time. He gives us the honor of being his sons. And he says, go out and work. Yeah. And I think it's the same with us in our Christian life. A long time ago, a Christian, he was a watchmaker, owned a business. I think he made a lot of money, actually. But he said, Laurie, you get out of life what you put into it, no matter what it is. And I think he was using his business as an example. But I think it's true in the spiritual realm as well, you know, as well, that we get out of it what we put into it. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, well, I could watch Netflix. What's on Netflix? Find something interesting there, maybe a documentary. Or you could take time to kind of dig into the Word of God and understand something, good commentary, or maybe a series on television, and make the effort to open your mind up more to the reality that is going to last forever and ever. Yeah. And if you do that, in the end, you'll feel darn sight better than watching a Netflix film.
Yeah. I mean, I can see one of the biggest challenges of our current generation is sort of that succumbing to an entertainment culture where people just want to be entertained all the time, and that's how they find purpose and meaning in life. And kind of we've lost sight of that idea of contributing and making a difference in the world, and I suppose grabbing hold of that authority as God's children. Yeah. Okay, so we've got that authority. What does that yielding, do you think, look like in practice? Like, how do we exercise that authority but also yield our allegiance to him at the same time?
Well, I can say for me, like I was just saying about the choice between a Netflix film or disciplining myself to take that spare hour to read a good commentary on John's Gospel or something like that. That's part of it. I think there's a little bit in there where I have to convince myself continually that that's a better choice. There's something in me that would argue with me and say, no, just relax. Just take the night off, something like that. And I think it's, we've been given the authority to override that bit of us. And it's and God's going to cooperate with us if we do. And we get involved and we begin to get a right perspective. We see things with the right weighting, the right priorities. I know there's something in it. If I lose my way, if I kind of wonder what's going on again and start trying to find my bearings, the thing that I can say that is most true about me is whatever happens, I want to please the Father. That's my delight. And I think that's the allegiance part. It's not so much what are the rules he's given me and what should I do, but it's knowing that you're in this relationship, you're already a son of God or a daughter of God. He loves you. He's got a plan. Just the delight of being able to be on his side and to work with him in fulfilling his purposes in the whole of creation. I think for me, that's what it is to have that authority given, that acceptance as a son of God, and giving him my allegiance.
Yeah. I think that's what you're talking about there, I think is sort of a digging down into what belief is, that it's like really believing it is it's going to the heart of who we are, and that it really impacts the core of our being. It's not just a belief, yeah, I believe that, but it's actually this is the central belief, that really is the light, and he is the one who we would give that allegiance to. And then it obviously, belief doesn't just stop at believing, it gets worked out in how we live, what we do, who we are, our identity. We've actually run out of time, but next time I'd like to explore a bit about sort of mentioning there the word becoming flesh, and then the glory. Kind of have a think about that, the glory of God in the incarnation, and then full of grace and truth.
Yeah. Okay.
So thanks again, Laurie.
Oh, thanks, Lucas. Been good. Pleasure.
All right. Okay.